Welcome to Prajim Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 10 of ASP.NET video series. In this session, we'll learn about the properties, events, and methods that an ASP.NET TextBox control supports. We all know that the TextBox control is used to get the input from the user of the web application. An ASP.NET TextBox control has several properties that we need to be aware of as a developer. The most widely used property is the text mode property. Depending on how you configure this property, the look and feel and the behavior of the text box is going to change. For instance, if you set the text mode property of the text box to single line, then the end user can only enter a single line of text into the text box control. Whereas if you want the end user to enter multiple lines of text into the text box control, then set the text mode to multi-line. On the other hand, if you want to capture the password from the user, then set the text mode to password so that whatever the user types into the text box is masked. Let's look at that in action. I have an ASP.NET web application here which has got a text box and a button control on the web form. Now if you want to get to the properties of the text box control, right click that and select properties. Now let's set the text mode to single line, and when you set the text mode property of the text box to single line and when you run the application, a text box is displayed where the end user can only enter one line of text into the text box control. On the other hand, if you want to give the capability of entering multiple lines into the text box control, then set the text mode property to multi-line. And look at this, the moment I change this to multi-line, look at what's happening. It changes into a multi-line text box. And then you can actually control how many lines of text can be entered into this text box using the rows property. So there is this rows property. For example, let's say I want to allow the end user to enter only 5 lines of text. I can set that to 5. And then when I run this, this multi-line text box is displayed, and when the user starts typing and if he exceeds 5 lines of text, look at this, I automatically get a scroll bar using which I can scroll up and down. On the other hand, if I want to capture the password from the user, I can set the text mode to property to password. And then obviously when we run this and when we try to enter anything into that text box, it will be masked and it will not be revealed. Alright. Now let's set this text mode to single line. Now there is this text property which can be used to set or get the text box from text from the text box control. So this is one of the very commonly used password. Let's say I enter something into this text box and I want to append hello word along with whatever text that we have entered into the text box and display that. How do I do that? Obviously double click the button control, you get the click event handler, and I want to write something on to the response stream. So response.write hello, and to this I want to append whatever the user types into the text box. And if you look at this, the moment I say textbox1.text, look at the IntelliSense. It shows what this property is used for. It used to get or set the text content of the text box control. So now when we run the application and when you type anything into that text box and click the button control, it will display hello and then that word. For example, let's type Prajim, and then when I click the button control, look at this, hello Prajim. How is this being displayed? We are using the text property to retrieve what the user has typed and then appending that with this hello word on the button click event. So we can use the text property. And look at this, we use this text property in the code to retrieve. Now you can also use that in the designer if you want. Let's say if I want to set it to some default text when the page loads up, you can set that text property here. Let's say type in. Now the moment you do that, look at this, you see that message. So all these properties of the text box control that you see here can be set either at the design time or at the runtime using code. And we have just seen how to retrieve the text from the text box control at runtime. And you can also use this max length property to limit the number of characters that the end user can type. So let's say let's remove this default text. Now if you set the max length property, let's say for example to 5, the end user can only type 5 characters into the text box, when the web form actually renders. So when I try to type more than 5 characters, look at this, I'm trying to type, but it doesn't allow you to enter those things. So max length property can be used to limit the number of characters that the user can enter. And read only property, as the name states, if you want the text not to be editable in the text box control, then set this property to true. So let's set the read only property to true. So F4 to get to the properties, and then if I select read only, by default it's false, and if you change that to true, and when you run the application, you wouldn't be able to type anything into that text box. Look at this, I'm trying to type, but you cannot do that because that's a read only text box. Tooltip, this is interesting property. The tooltip is actually displayed when the mouse is over the control. So if you set the tooltip, for example here, let's say the tooltip is please enter your name, and then when you actually run the application and when you hover the mouse over that control, it's going to display that tooltip. So look at this, as I hover my mouse, please enter your name. So the tooltip is displayed when the mouse is over the control. And we have seen how to use the rows property to limit the number of lines to display for a multi-line text box, whereas there is another property called columns. We use this property to specify the width of the text box control in characters. Now if you look at this, we have height and width properties which we can use to control the height and width of a text box, but that one you can specify in pixels. But whereas if you want to specify the width of the text box in characters, then we can make use of this columns property. So for example, if I want to limit the number of characters to 10, then you can specify columns is 10, in which case the end user will be able to type only 10 characters. And this auto postback property, we have already spoken about this when we discussed about control level events. We know that there are several ASP.NET controls which has got cached events. For example, text box is one of them. If you want to check the events that the text box control supports, what you can basically do is select the control and go to its properties window, and within the properties window, look at this lightning bulb symbol. So when you click that, this page will show you all the events that are supported by this text box control. Now look at this text changed event is the one that we commonly use. And when does this event get fired? This gets fired whenever the text in the text box changes, and by default this event is a cached event, meaning let's see what actually happens. Now when I run this page, but then we don't have the event handler, so let's generate the event handler. To generate the event handler, we double click the control. Upon double clicking the control, look at this, I have this event handler generated, textbox1 underscore text change. Now you might be wondering how is this event handler hooked to the text changed event of the text box control. If you actually look at the HTML, this is the text box control, and if you look at this, there is the properties, tooltip, read only, whatever we have set, but there is also this event on text changed. On text changed, we are calling a method with this name, textbox1 underscore text changed. So we are using this on text changed event basically, and we are hooking up this event handler to that event of the text box, text changed event of the text box control. So this is how the text box control knows it has to call this event handler when the text in the text box is changed. So obviously let's simply say response.write, and we want to just say text changed. So now when we run this application and when we change the text in the text box, it's not going to immediately post back Okay, we have set that to read only, so that's why I'm not able to type in anything. Let's remove that read only flag. So let's delete it. Again, you can do that either in the HTML or through the designer using the properties window. So I'm doing that in the HTML, remove that read only property. So now when we run this and type something into the text box, and look at this, when I lose the focus of the text box, I don't have the event fired. But when I click the button, look at this, text changed event. It's cached until the page is posted back. And then upon post back, when I click the button, that's when this event is fired. But let's say we want this text changed event to be fired immediately, then you set the auto post back property to true. So again, you can do that either in the HTML directly, or you can do that through the designer. So let's do that in the HTML. So auto post back is equal to, we can set that to true. And the moment we do that, and when we run this, and when the text in the text box changes, it will automatically post back. Let's say I'm typing this text and clicking away so that the text box loses focus. Look at that, the event get immediately fired. So that's about the auto post back property. And we already seen that text changed event is one of the events supported by the text box control, and this is fired whenever the text is changed. And this is one of the very interesting methods, focus method. And as you can see, this method can be used to set the input focus onto that control. Let's say if I have a large form where we are capturing information from the employee or a customer, and we want a specific text box control to receive the focus when the web form is loaded, then you can use this focus method. Let's see how to actually use that. So if you look at this, I have this text box control. Now if I go to the code behind and the page load, I'm saying text box 1 dot focus, and look at this, the IntelliSense shows this method is used to set input focus to a control. So when you do that, and when I run this, look at what happens. Let's cancel that and rerun that. So when the page loads, look at that, the text box will receive the focus, and look at that cursor, it's automatically blinking there. Now you wouldn't know the difference if, let's say I have more than one text box. Let's copy that. So 1, 2, and then 3 text boxes. We have 3 text boxes, but then we are only saying set the focus to the first text box. And if you look at the HTML, the first text box is this one, text box 1. And since we copied the text box, all these properties also got copied, but that's fine. Now let's run this. Look at this, out of these 3 text boxes, the first text box will receive the focus when the web form eventually loads. Okay, now what actually happens if I call the focus method on 2 or more text boxes? Because if you look at the code right now, we are only calling focus on one text box. Now let's say I call this focus on more than one text box. I will set this to text box 2 dot focus. Now we are saying, okay, set the focus to text box 1 as well as text box 2. Is it possible for the cursor to blink in 2 text boxes at the same time? You can imagine what actually happens here. Whatever is the last text box that has this focus method called, that will receive the focus. So even if you call the focus method on multiple text boxes, only one of them is going to receive the focus. So here the text box on which the last text box on which we are calling the focus method is text box 2. So when the page renders, you can see that text box 2 receives the focus. Alright, and we have already seen, to view the properties of the text box control, you can right click on the control and select properties. In the properties window, you can also find the events which will be shown using that lightning bulb symbol. All these properties can be set at the design time or at runtime using code. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET C# and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.